Welcome back, everybody, to the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. Today's chapter is Chapter 3, and it is titled The Night Bus. Relax and enjoy. Harry was several streets away before he collapsed onto a low wall in Magnolia Crescent, panting from the effort of dragging his trunk. He sat quite still, anger still surging through him, listening to the frantic thumping of his heart. But after 10 minutes alone in the dark street, a new emotion overtook him: panic. Whichever way he looked at it, he had never been in a worse fix. He was stranded, quite alone, in the dark Muggle world, with absolutely nowhere to go. And the worst of it was he had just done serious magic, which meant that he was almost certainly expelled from Hogwarts. He had broken the decree for the restriction of underage wizardry so badly, he was surprised Ministry of Magic representatives weren't swooping down on him where he sat. Harry shivered and looked up and down Magnolia Crescent. What was going to happen to him? Would he be arrested? Or would he simply be outlawed from the wizarding world? He thought of Ron and Hermione, and his heart sank even lower. Harry was sure that, criminal or not, Ron and Hermione would want to help him now, but they were both abroad, and with Hedwig gone, he had no means of contacting them. He didn't have any Muggle money either. There was a little wizard gold in the money bag at the bottom of the trunk, but the rest of the fortune his parents had left him was stored in a vault at Gringotts Wizarding Bank in London. He'd never be able to drag his trunk all the way to London, unless... He looked down at his wand, which he was still clutching in his hand. If he was already expelled, his heart was now thumping painfully fast, a bit more magic couldn't hurt. He had the invisibility cloak he had inherited from his father. What if he bewitched the trunk to make it featherlight, tied it to his broomstick, covered himself in the cloak, and flew to London? Then he could get the rest of his money out of his vault and begin his life as an outcast. It was a horrible prospect, but he couldn't sit on this wall forever, or he'd find himself trying to explain to Muggle police why he was out in the dead of night with a trunk full of spell books and a broomstick. Harry opened his trunk again and pushed the contents aside, looking for the invisibility cloak, but before he had found it, he straightened up suddenly, looking around him once more. A funny prickling on the back of his neck had made Harry feel he was being watched, but the street appeared to be deserted, and no lights shone from any of the large square houses. He bent over his trunk again, but almost immediately stood up once more, his hand clenched on his wand. He had sensed rather than heard it. Someone or something was standing in the narrow gap between the garage and the fence behind him. Harry squinted at the black alleyway. If only it would move. Then he'd know whether it was just a stray cat or something else. "Lumos," Harry muttered, and a light appeared at the end of his wand, almost dazzling him. He held it high over his head, and the pebble-dashed walls of number 2 suddenly sparkled. The garage door gleamed, and between them Harry saw quite distinctly the hulking outline of something very big, with wide, gleaming eyes. Harry stepped backward. His legs hit his trunk, and he tripped. His wand flew out of his hand as he flung out an arm to break his fall, and he landed hard in the gutter. There was a deafening bang, and Harry threw up his hands to shield his eyes against a sudden blinding light. With a yell, he rolled back onto the pavement just in time. A second later, a gigantic pair of wheels and headlights screeched to a halt exactly where Harry had just been lying. They belonged, as Harry saw when he raised his head, to a triple-decker, violently purple bus, which had appeared out of thin air. Gold lettering over the windshield spelled, "The Night Bus." For a split second, Harry wondered if he had been knocked silly by his fall. Then a conductor in a purple uniform leapt out of the bus and began to speak loudly to the night. "Welcome to the Night Bus, emergency transport for the stranded witch or wizard. Just stick out your wand hand, Step on board, and we can take you anywhere you want to go. My name is Stan Shunpike, and I will be your conductor this eve." The conductor stopped abruptly. He had just caught sight of Harry, who was still sitting on the ground. Harry snatched up his wand again and scrambled to his feet. Close up, he saw that Stan Shunpike was only a few years older than he was, 18 or 19 at most, with large protruding ears and quite a few pimples. "What were you doing down there?" said Stan, dropping his professional manner. "Fell over," said Harry. "What'd you fall over for?" said Stan. "I didn't do it on purpose," said Harry, annoyed. One of the knees in his jeans was torn, and the hand he had thrown out to break his fall was bleeding. He suddenly remembered why he had fallen over and turned around quickly to stare at the alleyway between the garage and fence. The night bus's headlamps were flooding it with light, and it was empty. "What you looking at?" said Stan. "There was a big black thing," said Harry, pointing uncertainly into the gap. "Like a dog, but massive." He looked around at Stan, whose mouth was slightly open. With a feeling of unease, Harry saw Stan's eyes move to the scar on Harry's forehead. "What's that on your head?" said Stan abruptly. "Nothing," said Harry quickly, flattening his hair over his scar. If the Ministry of Magic was looking for him, he didn't want to make it too easy for them. "What's your name?" Stan persisted. "Neville Longbottom," said Harry, saying the first name that came into his head. So, this bus," he went on quickly, hoping to distract Stan. "Did you say it goes anywhere?" "Yup," said Stan proudly. "Anywhere you like, long as it's on land. Can't do nothing underwater." "Hey," he said, looking suspicious again. "You did flag us down, didn't you? Stuck out your wand, and didn't you?" "Yes," said Harry quickly. "Listen, how much would it be to get to London?" 11 sickles, said Stan. "But for 13 you can get a chocolate, and for 15 you can get an old water bottle and toothbrush in the color of your choice." Harry rummaged once more in his trunk, extracted his money bag, and shoved some gold into Stan's hand. He and Stan then lifted his trunk, with Hedwig's cage balanced on top, up the steps of the bus. There were no seats. Instead, half a dozen brass bedsteads stood beside the curtained windows. Candles were burning in brackets beside each bed, illuminating the wood-paneled walls. A tiny wizard in a nightcap at the rear of the bus muttered, "Not now, thanks. I'm prickling some slugs," and rolled over in his bed. "You have this one," Stan whispered, shoving Harry's trunk under the bed right behind the driver, who was sitting in an armchair in front of the steering wheel. "This is our driver, Ernie Prang. This is Neville Longbottom, Ern." Ernie Prang, an elderly wizard wearing very thick glasses, nodded to Harry, who nervously flattened his bangs again and sat down on his bed. "Take away, Ern," said Stan, sitting down in the armchair next to Ernie's. There was another tremendous bang, and the next moment Harry found himself flat on his bed, thrown backward by the speed of the night bus, pulling himself up. Harry stared out of the dark window and saw that they were now bowling along a completely different street. Stan was watching Harry's stunned face with great enjoyment. "This is where we was before you flagged us down?" he said. "Where are we, Ern? Somewhere in Wales?" Said Ernie. "How come the muggles don't hear the bus?" said Harry. "Them," said Stan contemptuously, "don't listen properly, do they? Don't look properly either. Never notice nothing, they don't." "Must go wake up Madame Marsh, Stan," said Ern. "We'll be in Abergavenny in a minute." Stan passed Harry's bed and disappeared up a narrow wooden staircase. Harry was still looking out of the window, feeling increasingly nervous. Ernie didn't seem to have mastered the use of a steering wheel. The night bus kept mounting the pavement, but it didn't hit anything. Lines of lamp posts, mailboxes, and trash cans jumped out of its way as it approached, and began back into position once it had passed. Stan came back downstairs, followed by a faintly green witch wrapped in a traveling cloak. "There you go, Madam Marsh," said Stan happily as Ern stamped on the brake, and the bed slid a foot or so toward the front of the bus. Madame Marsh clamped a handkerchief to her mouth and tottered down the steps. Stan threw her bag out after her and ran the doors shut. There was another loud bang, and they were thundering down a narrow country lane, trees leaping out of the way. Harry wouldn't have been able to sleep even if he had been traveling on a bus that didn't keep banging loudly and jumping 100 miles at a time. His stomach churned as he fell back to wondering what was going to happen to him, and whether the Dursleys had managed to get Aunt Marge off the ceiling yet. Stan had unfurled a copy of the Daily Prophet and was now reading with his tongue between his teeth. A large photograph of a sunken-faced man with a long matted hair blinked slowly at Harry from the front page. He looked strangely familiar. "That man," Harry said, forgetting his troubles for a moment. "He was on the Muggle News." Stanley turned to the front page and chuckled. "Sirius Black," he said, nodding. "Course it was on the Muggle News, Neville. Where you been?" He gave a superior sort of chuckle at the blank look on Harry's face, removed the front page, and handed it to Harry. "You want to read the papers more, Neville?" Harry held the paper up to the candlelight and read. "Black still at large. Sirius Black, possibly the most infamous prisoner ever to be held in Azkaban Fortress, is still eluding capture, the Ministry of Magic confirmed today. We are doing all we can to recapture Black," said the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, this morning, "and we beg the magical community to remain calm." Fudge has been criticized by some members of the International Federation of Warlocks for informing the Muggle Prime Minister of the crisis. "Well, really I had to, don't you know?" said an irritable Fudge. "Black is mad. He's a danger to anyone who crosses him, magic or Muggle. I have the Prime Minister's assurance that he will not breathe a word of Black's true identity to anyone. And let's face it, who would believe him if he did?" While Muggles have been told that Black is carrying a gun, a kind of metal wand that Muggles use to kill each other, the magical community lives in fear of a massacre like that of 12 years ago, when Black murdered 13 people with a single curse. Harry looked into the shadowed eyes of Sirius Black, the only part of the sunken face that seemed alive. Harry had never met a vampire, but he had seen pictures of them in his Defense Against the Dark Arts classes, and Black, with his waxy white skin, looked just like one. "Scary-looking guy, eh?" said Stan, who had been watching Harry read. "He murdered 13 people?" said Harry, handing the page back to Stan. With one curse?" "Yup," said Stan. "In front of witnesses and all. Broad daylight. Big trouble it caused, didn't it, Ern?" said Ern darkly. Stan swiveled in his armchair, his hands on the back, the better to look at Harry. "Black was a big supporter of you-know-who," he said. "What, Voldemort?" said Harry without thinking. Even Stan's pimples went white. Ern jerked the steering wheel so hard that a whole farmhouse had to jump aside to avoid the bus. "You out of your tree?" yelped Stan. "What'd you say his name for?" "Sorry," said Harry hastily. "Sorry, I forgot." "Forgot?" said Stan weakly. "Blimey, my heart's going that fast." So Black was a supporter of you-know-who?" Harry prompted apologetically. "Yeah," said Stan, still rubbing his chest. "Yeah, that's right. Very close to you-know-who, they say. Anyway, when little Harry Potter got the better of you-know-who..." Harry nervously flattened his bangs down again. "All you-know-who's supporters was tracked down, wasn't they, Ern? Most of them knew it was all over, with you-know-who gone, and they came quiet. But not Sirius Black. I heard he thought he'd be second in command once you-know-who had taken over. Anyway, they cornered Black in the middle of a street full of muggles, and Black took out his wand and blasted half the street apart, and a wizard got it, and so did a dozen muggles what got in the way. Horrible, eh? You know what Black did then?" Stan continued in a dramatic whisper. "What?" said Harry. "Laughed," said Stan. "Just stood there and laughed. And when reinforcements from the Ministry of Magic got there, and went with him and quiet as anything, still laughing his head off. 'Cause you're mad, ain't he, Ern? Ain't he mad? If he weren't when he went to Azkaban, he will now," said Ern in his slow voice. "I'd blow myself up before I set foot in that place. Serves him right, mind you. After what he did." "They had a good job covering up, didn't they, Ern?" Stan said. "Whole street blown up, all the muggles dead. What was it they said appeared, Ern?" "Gas explosion," grunted Ernie. "And now he's out," said Stan, examining the newspaper picture of Black's gaunt face again. "Never been a breakout from Azkaban before, has there, Ern? Beats me how he did it. Frightening, eh? Mind I don't fancy his chances against them Azkaban guards, eh, Ern?" Ernie suddenly shivered. "Talk about something else, Stan. There's a good lad. Them Azkaban guards give me the collywobbles." Stan put the paper away reluctantly, and Harry leaned against the window of the night bus, feeling worse than ever. He couldn't help imagining what Stan might be telling his passengers in a few nights' time. "Air about that Harry Potter. Blew up his aunt. And I'm on the night bus, didn't we, Ern? He was trying to run for it." He, Harry, had broken wizard law just like Sirius Black. Was inflating Aunt Marge bad enough to land him in Azkaban? Harry didn't know anything about the wizard prison, though everyone he'd ever heard speak of it did so in the same fearful tone. Hagrid, the Hogwarts gamekeeper, had spent 2 months there only last year. Harry wouldn't soon forget the look of terror on Hagrid's face when he had been told where he was going, and Hagrid was one of the bravest people Harry knew. The night bus rolled through the darkness, scattering bushes and waste baskets, telephone booths and trees, and Harry lay restless and miserable on his feather bed. After a while, Stan remembered that Harry had paid for hot chocolate, but poured it all over Harry's pillow when the bus moved abruptly from Anglesey to Aberdeen. One by one, wizards and witches in dressing gowns and slippers descended from the upper floors to leave the bus. They all looked very pleased to go. Finally, Harry was the only passenger left. "Right then, Neville," said Stan, clapping his hands. "Whereabouts in London?" "Diagon Alley," said Harry. "Righto," said Stan. "Hold tight then." Bang! They were thundering along Charing Cross Road. Harry sat up and watched buildings and benches squeezing themselves out of the night bus's way. The sky was getting a little lighter. He would lie low for a couple of hours, go to Gringotts the moment it opened, then set off where? He didn't know. Ern slammed on the brakes and the night bus skidded to a halt in front of a small and shabby-looking pub, the Leaky Cauldron, behind which lay the magical entrance to Diagon Alley. "Thanks," Harry said to Ern. He jumped down the steps and helped Stan lower his trunk and Hedwig's cage onto the pavement. "Well," said Harry. "Bye then." But Stan wasn't paying attention, still standing in the doorway to the bus. He was goggling at the shadowy entrance to the Leaky Cauldron.